Welcome everybody to the Wake Up Call channel. If you haven't heard, there's a new thing called a heat dome that's occurring over the East Coast, over New Jersey, New York. Pretty much the majority of the Northeast is sitting under a heat dome. Now, the term heat dome has been used in the past, but we're seeing it normalize. You might remember it was once called summer, maybe, summer heat wave. Maybe, perhaps. But now we have heat dome, and there's multiple reasons for this, of course, because they're convincing people. You probably have been around some of these sheeple who repeat everything they hear on the news. They're called zombies. We live among them. And all they need to be told is that it's the hottest summer on record, and then they go out and they repeat it. Now, do they have any type of documentation? No, they do not. Do they know that the government changes history on a day in and day out basis so that if you actually try to research, suddenly it's never been 97 degrees in places like Chicago before? That's what I'm about to show you in a news clip. They tell you it's never been this hot. Now, if it was 150 degrees, maybe I would start being suspicious. But they can't make it that hot because if they could, trust me, they would. But the other thing we need to keep an eye out on is the potential for quote-unquote wildfires, because they can use this heat dome as an excuse to use direct energy weapons again. And we see them weaponizing weather every single day around the United States of America right now. We've seen these tornadoes that have just demolished Central America. We again see another wildfire. Prayers to anybody out in California who's affected by this, because again, they just continually target California. They're just demolishing it to rebuild it and bring in their new infrastructure. And again, just north of Los Angeles is just on fire again. Nothing's ever done to prevent these fires. You would think with the amount of tax money we spend that maybe they could, produce enough water to shoot out of this. Of course not, because they do this deliberately. They geoengineer, they chemtrail the skies. I've done videos on this in the past. They're the ones who make the accelerant, and then they set ablaze all of these areas that they want to set ablaze. They're doing this strategically. So you might even remember this photograph, which I've used in the past. For those of you that don't know, this was a photo that was taken from an airplane. A jet pilot took this photo over the North Pacific Ocean, okay? And you could clearly see that they were using microwaves to heat up the ocean and create a heat dome. Then they're able to move these things to land where they could sit it over a city. Thus, if anyone out there is wondering, well, how come it's got a dome on top? And I know that gets a lot of people talking about the notion of a dome, but let's just look at the perspective of, well, why is it sitting over this specific piece of land? Why is it sitting where they're telling us there's a dome? It's not going to leave this wall to this wall, because they strategically can do this. They can heat up the ocean, they can use microwaves to do this, and then they can move things around. That's what they do. That's what geoengineering is. But let's start by taking a look at this news clip that's airing. And of course, this is the type of propaganda that they put in place. So people out there, they think it's hotter than it's ever been, right? As if it's never been 90 degrees in New Jersey, New York City, etc. in the past. It's never hit 90. This is so crazy. This makes them what? It makes them believe more and more in the notion of climate change. These are people now who are very easily manipulated. They believe whatever they're told, and then they go and they regurgitate it. On top of that, keep an eye on the theory here for potential wildfires, because they're warning people about more and more wildfires, and we're going to see wildfires hit places like the East Coast. And all they need is to build in some excuses like this to start using direct energy weapons in places like New York, and people won't be suspicious because all they'll have to do is come out and say, well, there was a heat dome in New York City. That's how the wildfire started. And everybody out there will go, oh, that's why, because of the heat dome. It just, they just give you their fictitious science. They tell you that it sits right over this specific spot. It's hotter than it's ever been. There's no air circulating. Thus, it's just causing fires. Thus, the next thing you know, cities will just be lit on fire, and they'll tell you that it's from a heat dome, and these people will actually believe it. This is what's going on. This is what they're warning you about with their record heat wave, which isn't even hitting 100 in some places.
This morning, tens of millions from coast to coast are broiling thanks to an early blast of record heat.
Oh my God, it's going to be hot.
More than 70 million Americans waking up under heat alerts from Iowa through Maine. A stubborn heat dome sending temperatures soaring up to 25 degrees above average and threatening to shatter more than 100 daily records this week. In the Midwest, Chicago hitting 97 degrees yesterday, smashing a record set back in 1957. And Detroit residents taking a sweltering 101-degree heat index in stride.
A great smothering heat and then a beautiful cool breeze off the Michigan water.
The National Weather Service warning the Ohio River Valley may experience its most impactful heat wave of the 21st century.
You can't be out too long. You have to stay hydrated.
And those blistering temps are now barreling east, with officials in several major cities warning people to take the heat seriously.
Summers are different than they were before.
New York's governor activating the National Guard, Boston's mayor declaring a state of emergency. But out west, the emergency is wildfires, with more than 20 burning across multiple states. New evacuation orders issued yesterday for an entire community in New Mexico. The village of Ruidoso telling residents go now, with 2 fires growing rapidly in the area. And in California,
make sure you got our back.
The Post Fire north of LA now topping 15,000 acres and threatening dozens of homes. With dramatic conditions in the west and extreme heat rolling east, Americans bracing for a wild weather week.
All right, so back to the heat and adding to the chaos here. Tens of thousands of people here in Pittsburgh lost power overnight after severe storms rolled through, and crews are now racing to restore it, knowing how desperate everyone is for air conditioning. Hoda?
Yeah, all right. Maggie Vespa in Pittsburgh. There, Maggie, thank you.
Thanks for a long night. Al, good morning. What do you got?
Yeah, good morning. Unfortunately, guys, Maggie put it best. We are looking at a long-duration heat event through Friday. These are potential record highs from Louisville, Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, Syracuse, Burlington, Bangor, Maine. We're looking at Wilmington. Temperatures anywhere from 10 to 30 degrees above average for those records. For today, Buffalo, not quite close to the record, but the heat index is going to be 98. It's going to feel like that. Triple digits in Pittsburgh. It's going to feel like 90 in Boston, 96 in Washington, D.C. And then we move on into tomorrow. And look at this. Triple digits feeling like in Concord, Syracuse, Altoona, Pennsylvania, 93. Feels like 100 tomorrow in Cleveland. And that heat continues right on into Thursday. We're not going to really see a break in this for at least a week in this area in purple, stretching from New England all the way down to St. Louis, Detroit, Cincinnati. This is a long duration event that could actually be deadly if you are exposed to this heat long enough. Here's the deal now. Through Thursday, this strong dome of high pressure, this heat dome, hangs into the northeast. But then as we get toward the weekend, it slides back down to the south. So we get a little bit of a break for upstate New York and New England. But the Midwest and the mid-Atlantic states on into the Great Lakes still going to be feeling that heat. And you can see, look at these. These are the number of days in a row where we're going to be looking at this heat wave lasting. Syracuse, 4 days. Cincinnati, 8 days, 90 or above. New York, 5 days. D.C., 8 days as well.
So again, we need to watch the stories and watch these locations, not because we need to be concerned about the climate. We need to be concerned about areas that they're targeting, because they're telling you that these are the places that are sitting under a heat dome, because these are likely places that they're going to do stuff. Now, in addition to direct energy weapons, because it doesn't mean 100% this time around that they'll use a direct energy weapon there, but there's certainly going to be grid shutdowns. I've talked about this. I've warned about this for a long time. There's going to be more and more grid shutdowns, and people don't realize you get a week with the power off, it causes a lot of death. Most people out there just think, oh, the power's off. I'm going to be bored. I'm going to be sitting in my home playing Scrabble with my grandparents. Well, you're not going to have air conditioning. You're not going to have running water. Most likely not going to have running water unless you live in a city. Okay, but if you have well water, unless you have a well pump like the Amish in your backyard, you're not going to be able to get water. I can't tell people that enough. There's people out there that think if the power is off, that they still have running water. If they live somewhere where they have well water. You do not. Okay, if you have a generator, okay, yes, you'll be able to access water with a generator, but don't be surprised sooner or later when they conveniently start shutting the natural gas off for anybody out there, unless you have a propane generator with your own propane put into the ground. Don't be surprised when they start cutting the natural gas, because that's next. That's part of Agenda 2030 as well. So you can see where they're headed with this propaganda, right? They're telling you that it's hotter than it's ever been. That's all people need to hear. Oh, it's the hottest it's been since 1957. Oh, nobody could recall Chicago ever hitting 100 degrees in the last 60 years. No, New York City's never hit 100 degrees, right? Here's some of the articles out there. Million face record high temperatures as heat dome intensifies over the U.S. Extreme heat has begun to hit the U.S. You know, it is June, everybody. You know, you know what I mean? I mean, show me, you know, when you want to convince people of climate change, they don't have the ability to make it 110 degrees in the middle of December. Now, if they were able to do that, trust me, they would. Because then they would come out and they would go, oh my goodness, look, it's 100 degrees on Christmas in New York City. Then people will go, okay, this is a real problem. So all they need to do is just give you basic propaganda and tell you it's hotter than it's ever been, knowing that you have no way other than to use their Google machine to find out what the hottest temperatures are in the history of New York City in June, right? Nobody out there has any way of finding this out unless you have almanacs stacked up in your home, right? Maybe some people do. If you do, okay, go find them and go post some of the temperatures on there. But let's be realistic here. They're just going to spew this type of stuff and never be held accountable for any of the data that they give because they never are. The government refuses to be held accountable for anything. We've seen that over the years, right? You know, when we see them out telling us to wear masks and then they're all out there not wearing masks, right? Then you say, why weren't they wearing them? Oh, they don't even have to answer the question. They just smirk at you and say, stop, you're being crazy, right? So, of course, they're not going to hold you accountable or hold themselves accountable or be held accountable by us when it comes to them making up data, because all they do is make up data. So, according to meteorologists, about 265 million people in the U.S. are forecast to see their temperatures reach or exceed 90 degrees, with many experiencing heat of about 105 by next week. The system, an upper-level ridge of high pressure, is expected to bring record-breaking temperatures in the 90s and beyond. Some areas will experience temperatures as high as 105 or 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Cities forecast to be hit by the heat wave include Chicago, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Philly, Boston, New York, and Albany, New York. So this is what you got to keep in mind when you hear about the cities. I'd be very surprised if they actually go forward and use a direct energy weapon on a city. I think that would be pretty ballsy of them. But at this point, honestly, with everything that I've seen as somebody who has studied this for a long period of time, they can literally get away with anything and tell you that it's something else. That's how dumbed down that they have the sheeple. They could probably show you the direct energy weapon coming directly out of a plane, a beam firing into a building, and then melting a city, and then explain to everybody out there that the beam was just, it was reflecting off the ionosphere because it was so hot from the dome. And these people would actually believe it, and they wouldn't believe the government was using a direct energy weapon on them. But I think the thing to watch with the cities here, specifically them mentioning cities, and then keeping this in that specific area where they're telling us the dome is for large amounts of power outages. Now, Pittsburgh supposedly already had a big power outage, okay, but I would expect other cities like New York to have blackouts, summer blackouts for days and days on end. There's multiple things that happen when they do this with blackouts. Don't forget about the conditioning mechanisms that get put into place. The more these things start to happen, the more people get used to it, living without electricity, or the more people just get used to, it's so hot, there's no power. Oh, it's this, there's no power. And then they can start transitioning people into their green energy by telling people, look, the power grid is a disaster. The power grid doesn't work. We need one so that we never have power outages, except, of course, every week when we tell you have to shut your power off for 5 hours a day and you can't have running water in the middle of the night. And everybody out there, of course, will agree with it. So you could see, as you saw in that clip, the direct energy weapons being used out in California. Now, many people out there go, well, natural forest fires really do happen. Yeah, do they keep happening in the same place? Does lightning strike the same place twice? Okay. It's clear that that specific area in California is one that they've been targeting. So we know California is going to be one of the first states that rolls out their smart cities, their new infrastructure, which is going to be AI governance, okay? So they have to wipe areas out. So if they had a blueprint and they were like, this is where we're going to build the city, everybody just thinks like, what, the city's just going to sit back on top of Los Angeles? You don't think it's going to be bigger than that? That it's going to run the whole state? Of course it is. They're not just going to tear down some buildings in LA and put up some new ones, okay? So this thing has to be long. It has to be miles and miles on end, likely going from Los Angeles all the way up to San Francisco, probably all the way up to Bohemian Grove, right? So over the last couple of years, what have we seen? We've almost seen a direct line, a pathway that's just getting melted, right? So if they were going to build it there, they obviously need to destroy what? They're going to have to destroy the forest. What do you think? They're just going to go in there with a bulldozer and they're going to start digging roots out, right? and just tell you, oh yeah, we're going to build a smart city here. No, they're doing it the easy way for them, the way that they want to do it, and then they're convincing people that all this destruction that's going on is because of the climate. It's the same thing with the tornadoes. You don't even hear the mainstream media talking about this plethora of tornadoes that just wiped out the Midwest. I mean, it's frightening. And people become so desensitized to it, they think it's normal for 70 tornadoes to hit Detroit or hit Michigan. They're just like, oh yeah, 70. We're not talking about, hey, did you hear there was a big tornado, a big twister? 70 tornadoes at once, 60 tornadoes, then the next day. And they're like, all these tornadoes are just sitting right over this location day after day after day. That's what the mainstream media covered. I showed clips of Al Roker. He's like, for the next 5 days, there's just going to be tornadoes right here. You're just like, what? What do you mean they're going to be right there? They're just going to be sitting there and they're just going to keep popping up and disbanding and popping up? Oh, yeah, sure. That doesn't sound suspicious at all. And then they try to convince you that, well, it's climate change. It's climate change. That's why this is happening, right? Just like a heat dome. It's just sitting over now the East Coast all of a sudden. And what are they telling you? Well, they're telling you it's the hottest thing we've ever seen. It's so hot. It's hitting 100 degrees. Oh my gosh, I can't remember ever feeling 100 degrees in June at the Jersey Shore. I mean, many people can remember that and relate to that, right? But they know that you can't remember 3 minutes ago. You certainly can't remember 3 years ago when the government enslaved you in your home, lied to you about everything, tricked people into poisoning themselves. Nobody seems to remember that. So they know you're not going to remember that it's hit 100 degrees before. They're just going to tell you that this is all just a freak thing going on with the climate. And eventually we need to do something about it, which will be the same exact thing we just did 3 years ago. Lock ourselves in our home, be fearful of something that doesn't exist. Bada bing, bada boom. So keep an eye on the heat wave stories, but remember specifically the two things, the grid shutdowns, okay, because we're going to see probably grid shutdowns in a lot of those areas. Chicago, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Philly, Boston, New York, and Albany, New York is the ones that they're mentioning, okay? But that's a big area over there where we could see, experiments done with the grid shutdown. But on top of that, because they could even roll FEMA in. If there's a couple days with nothing in the city, people are going to need water, right? You could see that. And the other thing, of course, is direct energy weapons. Start seeing fires in areas maybe outside of New York City, maybe in rural New Jersey areas as well, maybe even Vermont. You see that bubble's going pretty far up, right? Pennsylvania, a lot of farmland there as well. It could just start. Remember, in Texas, they were targeting farms, right? We saw the cattle that they just wiped out. And everyone's like, oh, who cares? It's the Texas Panhandle. Oh, it's only, it only makes 35% of our cattle, our beef that we eat. Yeah, don't worry about that, right? So keep an eye on resources and keep an eye on the power grid. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all well. Enjoy the summer heat wave. I mean, the heat dome, huh? Yeah, give me a break. I thank you for being here again. God bless all of you and your families.